spend some time with our managers. All of them cannot participate, but if you don't mind, I'll just play the video then for them at a later stage.
Yeah,
Sharon, can I suggest, as Sharon says, it is recorded, but can I suggest that potentially or possibly we could do an in-house session with you and your managers? I'm quite happy to do that so that we can actually have a strategic discussion for you, because you are one of those companies directly affected by this legislation. And I think strategically it would be important to engage with it as a team.
Yeah, no, certainly. I would love that. Yeah, no, certainly. Let's do that. So I'll ask Michelle then to set up a discussion for us, say in 2 weeks' time or something in that line, 2 to 3 weeks.
Ask her to be in touch with me and then I'll set it up.
Okay, that would be brilliant. Thank you so much.
And Sharon, that goes for any of your other members who also want the same thing. Quite happy to do it.
Okay. Gerard, I think when you're meeting with Ivor, please remember to bring up the client we were talking about the other day that we've been communicating on, because I think he can also help you sort that one out.
Yeah, I think so. Ivor, it's all around one of our clients, Europe Assist.
Yeah.
They're quite a significant contact center with about 250 agent seats at any point in time. And I'm trying to get them to get onto the CCMG thinking as well as the professional designations. We do a lot of work with them from an e-study perspective as well as on a BEE perspective.
So Gerard, what might be quite useful, because you're a supplier to Europe Assist, it might be useful to put your mind around the idea of being a partner of Europe Assist, and doing it that way rather than necessarily only doing it through learnership or internship mechanisms.
Yeah, we've helped them to get onto yes already. So they are.
What I mean is you're actually able, in terms of the yes model, you're actually able to incubate a yes team rather than them doing it as a service to them. But we can chat about that when we get together.
All right. Yeah, look, I did register them already, like I'm saying, so we could maybe look at your kind of thinking, when it gets to renewal, but there are 27 seats already filled with yes students. In fact, we're going to the extent that we're now placing external sponsorships within, on their seats. So they're acting as workplace provider for various other companies. So, but I would love to just to get your thoughts on how you think we could structure something like this.
All right, absolutely, excellent, very good.
Good. So I'm gonna sit and wait. In the meantime, I'm just gonna grab the NSDS tables as well. So I'll see you just now. I'll talk to you just now.
Fantastic, thanks.
So good morning, everybody. I see we already have 6 participants. We've got a couple more that may still join us. But I think if we're ready, we need to rock and roll with another awesome knowledge sharing and working discussion within amongst all of us. And Ivor, if you're ready, I'm going to hand over to you to start the discussion.
I am definitely ready. Can I just ask that everyone mutes their microphones? There's a little bit of kickback or feedback. Sharon, thank you so much for inviting me to run another one of these exciting webinars. And just to reiterate for your members who are participating, that in fact these webinars are intended to be interactive. They're not a presentation, they're a discussion. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over the National Skills Development Plan, and in fact this will amount to NSDS number 4. We have been participating over the last 20 years in a variety of national skills development strategy documents which come out every 4 or 5 years. The last one, number 3, actually stretched over an 8-year period, believe it or not, because it wasn't finalized. But the reality is that this is NSDS 4 that we are now talking about, and it's a National Skills Development Plan or National Skills Development Strategy, as it used to be called, which directs all of the skills development training and, if you want, CETA and Quality Council activities for the next, well, it's a plan which intends to run to 2030, although it gets revised every 4 or 5 years. The topic that they've used is an educated, skilled and capable workforce for South Africa. There's absolutely nothing different in that to the last NSDSs which have come out. The minister says, as distinct from the previous national skills development strategies, the National Skills Development Plan has been crafted in a policy context of the National Development Plan and the White Paper on Post-School Education and Training. There's an explicit acknowledgement that South Africa needs to join hands, blah, blah, blah. So the reality is that we know that NSDS 4 should be a little more inclusive, because it tries to reference the NSDP and rather it tries to reference the NDP and the WBP set into one integrated strategic document. But again, this has been done before on multiple occasions with very little integrated success, I do need to add. And if I'm sounding jaded, please excuse me. It is only because I've walked this road since NSDS 1, knowing what can be achieved and what has not been achieved in the process. The National Development Plan calls for an improvement in the quality of education and training to enhance the capabilities of our people so that they're active participants in developing the potential of the country. Well, this was a strategy in 2000. We're now in 2019. So what we have here is an acknowledgement that the quality of education is problematic and nothing has been done about it for the last 19 years. And we've got an acknowledgement as well that the people coming out of the education system are not active participants in delivering the potential of the country. Well, that, if ever there has been an acknowledgement that there's been abject failure, it is in that opening paragraph, that we need an improvement in the quality of education, and that the people coming through the education system at the moment are not actively participating in developing the potential of the country because of the education that they've been through. The National Skills Development Plan is informed by the vision and proposes that an understanding and determination of the demands of the labour market and of national priorities must be interpreted into appropriate interventions from education and training institutions. Again, just a lot of blah blah, because it's been in all of the previous documents as a priority. We know that this plan will be implemented on the 1st of April 2020. So we know that the targets and the strategies as set are live from the 1st of April 2020. And CETAs will remain an authoritative voice of the labour market and experts in their respective sectors. The one thing I did want to just spend a little bit of time with you, ladies and gentlemen, talking about is this concept, which is the concept of social partnerships, because a social partner is organized business, organized labor, and government sitting around the table on a partnership basis, working together to invest in skills development. Now, the irony is that the only social partner who to date has been investing in skills development has been organized business. And if you read this document, it is exactly the same in this document, that when they talk about funding, they talk about either funding directly from the CETAs, 80% of the skills levy collected, or funding from the National Skills Fund, which is the other 20% of the funding that's collected. So the reality is that when they talk about fiscal allocations, they're talking about the National Skills Fund, which comes from business. So this plan does not set in place any additional strategy to supplement the 1% skills levy which is collected from business. And I think that this is an absolutely critical consideration that we need to bear in mind, that there's been no change. And the entire plan, and the majority of this plan is predicated on spending money outside of the workplace. But the entire plan is funded out of the contribution, the ongoing contribution, the contribution that has been paid for the last 20 years only by business, with no supplementation from government whatsoever as far as these strategic objectives are concerned. Now that is something that should be of concern to you, because when you read this plan pays for fees must fall. This plan pays for the public technical vocational education and training colleges to be capacitated. And this plan pays for a whole new set of community colleges to be created, all out of the 1% of the skills levy. So the reality is you must be aware of the fact that there's going to be very little that's left as a result of this plan that has ostensibly been agreed to at NEDLAC by business, labor, and government. But this plan pays for all of those things. So there's going to be very little left to actually give back to business by way of grants, either for internships, for learnerships, for bursaries, or for any other key objectives, which this plan says that the business community has to be responsible for. And so please, I'm urging you, when you read this plan, to actually take all of those facts into account, because it is actually quite startling how they've managed to expand what it is this plan is going to have to be paying for, but not expand the income base for the funding that's available. The mission of the National Skills Development Plan is to improve access to occupations in high demand and priority skills aligned to supporting economic growth. Now, this is critically important, to improve access to occupations. What this plan does is it says this in no mean terms. It says this: we want to create a pathway for those people who are trained predominantly in our public universities and colleges to have ease of access into the occupations which are made available in the private sector. That is what this plan is about. It is about taking those people who are funded through fees must fall through the university sector and placing them in the world of work and having the business community pay for the privilege. That's what improving access to occupations in high demands means. Employment creation and social development, while also seeking to address systematic considerations. The term systematic is very important because it means that this plan acknowledges that in the government organizations, be they the TVET colleges, the public universities, and also importantly the Schedule 3 organizations such as CETAs, the National Skills Authority, the National Skills Fund, etc., SAQA, the QCTO. It's acknowledging that there are systematic problems and those organizations, none of those organizations are running properly. Now, every NSDS has done that, but this plan continues to do it as if it's some other organization or somebody else's responsibility and not the responsibility of the Department of Higher Education and Training. The plan seeks to ensure that South Africa has adequate, appropriate, high quality skills that contribute towards economic growth, employment creation, and social development. the organization, the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, says this: the educational system could be improved, especially in terms of developing both basic skills and technical skills. Now, as a previous member of the National Skills Authority, I can tell you in 1999, the OECD was saying exactly the same thing, that South Africa needed to focus on basic skill training and technical skill training. This plan acknowledges that over the last 19 years, we've gone backwards and nothing has been done about improving basic skills and technical skills with a specific focus on historically disadvantaged individuals. The report adds that more training options are needed for the employed and unemployed, and that this training should be relevant for the improved employability and career progress of participants. So what the OECD are saying is that our existing mechanisms, which essentially are universities and the previous technicons, which are now within those universities incorporated, and then the TVET structures, are failing. And because they're failing, we need more training options, and that's why this report suggests the introduction of community colleges. It doesn't, however, point fingers at why there are failures, except to acknowledge that they are systemic failures. All right. The NSDP, this plan, is a combination of the National Development Plan and the New Growth Pathway, where three priorities stand out. The need to raise employment through foster economic growth. Now, that's nothing that this plan can do anything about. The need to improve the quality of education, skills development, and innovation, and building the capability of the state to play a developmental and transformative role. So those ostensibly become the three broad priorities of this plan at the end of the day. What you've got to realize is that in the 2011 National Growth Plan, and from that, the National Development Plan of numerical objectives to be met by 2030, the following numerical objectives are in place. And I'm not necessarily going through these numerical objectives because they've been included in the National Skills Strategy documents year on year on year, and they've never ever been met. In fact, let me unpack them to show you why I say that. Expand the college system with a focus on improving quality. Well, better quality will build confidence in the college sector and attract more learners. The recommended participation rate in the TVET colleges sector of 25% would accommodate about 1.25 million enrollments. So by 2030, it's expected that about 1.25 million people will have been through the 50-odd technical vocational training colleges, which are run by the Department of Higher Education and Training. It's very important you take note that what this plan is saying is to you in your businesses, you better start taking the graduates from these TVET colleges, because that's the only way you're going to be incentivized. Number two, provide 1 million learning opportunities through community education and training colleges. Now, this is very important. These community education training colleges don't exist, which means that business is going to have to pay through its skills levy to create the community education and training colleges, and then to fund 1 million people actually going through those colleges and getting a different kind of education to the one they would get in the technical vocational education and training colleges, and importantly to the one they'd get in universities. Improve the throughput rate to 80% by 2030. We know that the throughput rate in the TVET colleges is less than 20%. That means that in the public institutions, and this goes for the universities as well, by the way, less than 20 out of every 100 people who enroll either at the TVET or the university level actually graduate. And they're wanting by 2030 to push that up from 20% to 80%. They want to produce 30,000 artisans per year by 2030. And that's a noble objective. That noble objective has been in all of the NSDSs. And on average, you're seeing between 2,000 and 5,000 artisans being produced a year. So again, no changes. They want to increase the enrollment at universities by at least 70%. So Well, we know that the universities are so overburdened with registrations at the moment in time, but they're wanting to push those registrations up by 70% by 2030. Increase the number of students eligible to study towards maths and science-based degrees to 450,000 by 2030. It's a noble objective. Increase the percentage of doctoral qualified staff in the higher education sector from 34% to 75%. Now, it's been proven and it's been shown that the best lecturers are not full-time lecturers, but the lecturers who are deployed from industry. And yet what they are doing is they're encouraging moving away from the deployment of subject matter experts in industry to full-time employed positions in the institutions and people who've got PhDs. Produce more than 100 doctoral graduates per million per year by 2030. So they want to push it up from 1,400 to over 5,000 a year by 2030, which tells you that whereas the undergraduate degree has become the norm in terms of replacing the matric level, particularly for literacy and numeracy standards in the country, they are actually targeting to split that level of job entry between matric, postgraduate degree, and undergraduate degree and then postgraduate degree, and expand science and technology innovations outputs by increasing research and development spending by government and through encouraging industry to do so. This is interesting, number 9. About a year ago, I had an altercation with Director General of Science and Technology in a public meeting because he made the statement that South Africans were not interested in research, and therefore all of the funding that's available through Science and Technology and the National Research Foundation, all of the funding that's available is currently being given in bursaries and subsidies to research students from other African countries. And his point was that there was just not enough South African graduates to give the research funding to. This document doesn't describe how that is going to be addressed. It sets us as an objective, as has been done in every NSDS, but it doesn't describe it. So that is obviously problematic, but it'll obviously be fleshed out over time, I'd imagine. The National Growth Plan calls for the need to improve skills in every job and target 1.2 million workers for certified on-the-job skills improvement programs annually. Essentially, the kinds of things that professional bodies are going to be responsible for. Certified on-the-job skills improvement programs, essentially CPD. Every CETA should therefore aim to facilitate and co-finance training for approximately 10% of the workforce annually. So this is the first indication where CETAs are told they've got to create a funding category to pay for CPD for 18.1 learners. In other words, the people who are currently employed in the workplace. The National Growth Plan commits government to improve CETA performance by strengthening governance, accountability, and admin systems, and it emphasizes that CETAs must prioritize the identification and funding of the main sector skills needs based on the National Growth Plan. All right, so I want to move to this section, which is the role of CETAs on the demand and the supply side. On the demand side, this plan requires that CETAs conduct labor market research and develop sector skills plans. So Sharon, I want to reference you here for a moment, and I want to say to you that what this National Skills Plan says, therefore, is that there needs to be a partnership agreement between the contact center professional body and the CETA or CETAs, which are responsible for referencing the sector skill plan intention with regard to the contact center sectors over the next 5 years. So there's an opportunity for the professional body to contact the CETAs and say, as far as the contact center sector of 9 industries is concerned, we want to become your research and sector skill planning partner for the contact center sector based on the fact that this is our objective, but it's also your mandated responsibility. Has that happened in the past, Sharon, if I may ask you?
No, it's never happened in the past, but if you see, I did drop you an email late last week where they are sort of wanting to discuss a few things. And I read this on the plane, so I'm very happy that you brought this up, because yes, I definitely see it as an opportunity for the professional body to assist the industry in this.
I think what's absolutely critical is that you need to be saying to the seaters, as your social partners, because we represent, the Employer Association certainly represents the companies which operate in the contact center sector, we will not authorize, we will not support any sector skills plan where the research you are relying on does not come from exercises which the CETA has funded, which are run and coordinated by the professional body. So you have to adopt a very firm approach with the CETAs, because otherwise what will happen is they will simply then put out tenders for research, and we know how that goes, but they'll put out tenders for research to be conducted, and they will base the research around the contact center sector, and they will then base their plans and their incentive programs around what is revealed as needs by the research without any participation of the professional body or the employer association.
I hear you. I agree, and I'm actually seeing them in April to discuss a number of these things. So yes, service.
Which CETA?
Services CETA.
All right. I think it's important that you I think it's important that you reference your 9 industries to the CETAs that exist, because, for example, the debt collecting component of the industry would fall into the financial services cluster of CETAs and not into the services CETA. The systems people, the people who put in the systems and the IT systems, would fall into the MICT CETA and not the services CETA. So you would need those agreements, those research agreements, if you want, with multiple CETAs and not just with the services CETA. And I think it's critically important that you understand that.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Ava.
Good. Any other questions or comments before we carry on? All right, let's move on then. So on the supply side, CETAs are there to address sector skills, needs and priorities, to address scarce and critical skills for pivotal grants. In other words, CETAs are there to define the requirements for pivotal grants to be given by the CETAs. But quite frankly, if there's no role being played by the professional body and the employer association in what those pivotal grants are actually being paid towards, then it is really up to, if you want, the grants division of the CETA, and it's falling outside of the strategic sector skill plan because there's no reference whatsoever to the objectives and to what's going on. So I think it's absolutely critically important that the professional body and the employer association take a leading responsibility for this activity rather than a reactive one. And if you want, lay the process of getting to this point down to those CETAs rather than react to invitations, if you're lucky, from those CETAs to participate in these various research activities and then sector skill planning activities, particularly around pivotal grants, because that really is that's about the only remaining thing which on occasion is still paid out to member companies that apply for grants. Good. Facilitate easy access and different entry points, articulation and RPL. Again, it's critically important that the professional body and the employer association talks about how RPL should and will be happening within the sector. And if you want, guides the CETA on how best that could happen given the constraints of the industry and the constraints of the sector rather than the other way around. So an RPL model gets put to the CETAs which is acceptable to industry rather than the other way around, if that makes sense. I think it's absolutely critical, again, Sharon, that from an RPL point of view, there is an acknowledgement that RPL has to be systematically programmed and has to be taking place to the satisfaction on the one hand, of the training providers and therefore the CHE, Council on Higher Education, or the QCTO, but on the other hand, to your member companies, because it's critical that what you want is for the line management cohort, if you want, of your member companies to take a responsibility in the RPL equation that takes place out there. Any questions or comments in that regard? Because I realize it's quite a controversial thing I've just said.
I just have a question for the participants that are with us at the moment. How much RPL are they actually doing in their companies? Anybody, you can type it if you want to, but just give me an indication, because we have experienced a very low uptake of RPL through the professional body. Even though we do offer it, it's a very low uptake.
Sharon, if I may comment, it's Gerard from eStudy's side, obviously being very active in the training industry. I must tell you that we have positioned the RPL process a number of times, at least 20 times with our clients, and there seems to be a negative perception around the RPL concept, or alternatively a misunderstanding on what the value of RPL could be in developing learning programs. And I think this is certainly good news for me, from also to see that the CETAs and through the NSDS, we're actually looking at RPL to making it a much more prominent tool in order to enhance learning overall. And especially from as a CCMG member, I would be very happy to see that CCMG also gets increases its participation in the RPL process and the role and function of RPL in learning itself.
But I must say, having also been to a SACWA conference recently, a couple of the professional bodies did get up and they did comment on the lack of participation in RPL. And SACWA turned around and just said, well, providing you can prove to us that you've made an effort, you're going to just have to submit the numbers that you have. And yes, Gerard, that's exactly what we find. There is such a low uptake on RPL. I think it is the understanding of it, or it's just too much work.
If I may follow up, thank you, Sharon. Ivor, maybe you can give us an indication. This document, this strategy, is it giving us an indication that CETAs will consider to finance RPL procedures, or do you think it's mainly to recognize RPL?
No. So it actually talks about facilitating easy access and different entry points for articulation in RPL, and later on there is evidence of responsibility to CETAs to include RPL projects as pivotal grants. So I think it does go beyond simply talking about why it's important, and it does give some kind of an imperative to the CETAs as an instruction to fund the RPL activities. What I think is critically important, Gerard, is for the professional body and the employer association, let's call it the federation or confederation in the sector, to essentially enter into an agreement with the CETAs to institutionalize RPL to the extent that it's recognized for purposes not only for access, in other words, giving people access either to qualifications or designations, but also as credit-bearing opportunities, so that the CETAs then, so that you can say to a CETA that we can actually cut the cost of an average qualification by the percentage of RPL credits that can be awarded to an individual, so that in the process we can spread the amount of money that's available from the CETA further to help you achieve your numerical objectives or targets. The problem is, Farah, that discussion hasn't taken place. So because the discussion hasn't taken place, there is no agreement, and therefore there's nothing which is a compunction on the CETAs to have to pay for RPL activities as a serious alternative route to obtaining a qualification or a professional designation, to actually sitting in a classroom for 3 years, or having to have a qualification to have access to a
Ivan, did you disappear on us there? Okay, guys, I'm just. Yeah, oh, okay, there we go. He's lost his connection. I'm sure.